Christmas time is here again, but should Christians celebrate it, or is it actually a pagan holiday? Also, how much is too much when it comes to Christmas church pageants? And why are classic Christmas songs and movies so much better than the modern secular equivalents? We talk about all that and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 40 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the diehard to my Christmas genre, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
Oh, that's a good one, Daniel. I was hoping you would take this festive opportunity to say I am the southern comfort to your eggnog, but maybe next year.
Well, you see, because eggnog is, in fact, disgusting. I think...
I will respectfully disagree with you on that, Daniel.
I feel like it's not talked about enough. Like, there's a reason we only have eggnog, like, a couple weeks of the year. Like,
well, I will say it's probably horrendous for your health, but we also do other things once a year that are horrendous for your health. And I think, I will say that eggnog is good. I like it.
See, I just feel like
and an eggnog latte, I think, is also a thing of beauty.
I feel like there's just enough time that passes so we forget that it's disgusting until you try it, and then we're just feeling good. But as you can tell, if you're watching the video version, it is the most festive time of year.
It is.
It is Christmas next week. It's crazy. I usually start my countdown in like March because I just love Christmas, and then it's still like we're like we're like about a week away from Christmas. It sneaks up on you.
It does that, and I'm like, it's equal parts exciting and terrifying. Because I'm not quite ready.
But hey, I have completed all my Christmas shopping. So this will be the last episode that we have of the year. Got our Christmas extravaganza.
Yeah, Christmas special.
And then we will take the time off for the year, reset, and be excited to join back next year. But there's some interesting stuff. This will be a very Christmas-themed episode because... why not? It is Christmas time. So a couple kind of just various topics and things all centered around the most holly jolly holiday. And kind of the first conversation I thought we could at least touch on, because it's something that keeps popping up, is the question of whether Christians should in fact celebrate Christmas at all. Or is Christmas maybe not all that we have been led to believe? So this is kind of a... Again, you may have seen it sort of pop up on social media. It seems like it does kind of, along with like the War on Christmas thing. It's just one of those like annual things where people share articles and you get comments or you just people mentioning it in different forms. And that is sort of the question of whether or not Christmas is in fact a pagan holiday. That although we celebrate it, we're comfortable, we love Christmas today, that we've been deceived. That was, in fact,
you're saying that was not always the case.
That if you trace it back far enough, it was not a Christmas holiday. So here's sort of I found an article, we can maybe link the article below, but kind of raising this question, I think, just to sort of summarize, I think what this sort of perspective is, kind of in the article, it says, why can't we find specific instructions about the careful observance of Christmas and Easter in the pages of the Bible? One would think such important celebrations would be a major part of the teaching of the New Testament church. But the Bible does not teach their observance. The Bible teaches 7 meaningful holy days, but not the major holidays celebrated today. The reality is that the Bible forbids the observance of holidays like Christmas and Easter that have their origin centuries before the birth of Jesus Christ. And in many ways, like that sort of sums up maybe the extreme case of it. But this idea that sort of like we're going off script with the Bible to celebrate something like Christmas. Are you convinced?
No, I'm not convinced.
Not quite yet.
Not there yet, Daniel.
So obviously there's a couple things about this. I mean, a couple just sort of realities before we get into I think where some of this perspective is coming from. One is that sort of, because you see this a bunch, like in these sort of articles and people, preaching this, against Christmas, sort of like holy days as opposed to holidays. And like holy days as 2 words is good. Like holidays is where we start getting into some like cultural trouble. Which like if you trace like the meaning of the word holiday,
is it? Or are we having an etymology study?
We are. We're going to school. It's just holy days into a later English, like
Yeah.
you take the roots, you have holy days, they become holidays, same meaning. So I think that's, I don't know, making a little bit too much about nothing. And kind of the other reality is just like, I think the Bible doesn't talk about Easter and Christmas, as holidays, probably for the same reason that it doesn't talk about like airplanes and video games and, cars and space travel. Like,
Yeah.
like if you read the Bible, like it seems like we end pretty close to like when these events happened.
Right.
So like, they're not jumping
haven't
into the
been-
future.
Yeah. I mean, the church hasn't like instituted some of these sort of annual events yet. And, it'll be like over the centuries that all kind of gets fleshed out. And, we have the traditions we have today sort of, because it's kind of been handed down through the centuries and it's taken years to kind of become what it is. And that doesn't make it inherently wrong or bad.
Yeah, I mean, like the New Testament church also didn't speak a lot about like church buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
Because they were meeting in homes. Doesn't mean that it's like therefore it is bad
Right.
to meet in a church building because they didn't. I think obviously cultures change, traditions, like how we celebrate. I think there are some things that are true as far as like this whole idea of like pagan origins of Christmas. There was sort of like an ancient Roman festival, Saturnalia, honoring the god Saturn, which was traditionally held like in mid-December, like around winter solstice, which obviously, a lot of people see that as sort of like the roots of Christmas that we took on that. And then there are, if you sort of look into like some of like the individual traditions, like Christmas wreaths and trees and lights and some of that kind of stuff, like a lot of them are, you can find earlier instances of like other festivals and stuff, like, like there is truth to the sense that like Christmas and like Christians sort of cherry picked some stuff of like, hey, that's kind of a cool thing. Why don't we add that into our Christmas, and like kind of hodgepodge it.
And I think too, maybe in framing all of this and in thinking about like sort of how all this comes to be, and why is Christmas the way it is, sort of in our modern society, and for us in particular in the Western society. I think sometimes too, it's like it wasn't like there was like a Christmas committee saying like this is good, that's not okay. It's like some of this is just sort of like it kind of just happens over years and years and centuries. And so it wasn't like, there was some committee sort of, decreeing like this is how we will celebrate Christmas. It's like a lot of this is, I would say, and I don't know, maybe in your research you found out something else, but it seems like a lot of it's a little more organic in the way that it's kind of come to us now.
I think that's how all traditions, like, I know my family, like, maybe 7 years ago or something, like on Christmas Eve, me and my wife put the kids to bed, and we were like, just spontaneously, we're like, hey, why don't we play like a board game? We started playing Risk, watching a movie, and then the next year it's like, oh, it's kind of fun that we did that last year, so let's do it again.
Yeah.
And, like now, fast forward, we have 2 almost 10-year-old kids. Like it's a whole tradition in our family. Like we at Christmas Eve we open a bunch of new board games. Like we stay up late playing games. Like sometimes we'll have my parents come over, and like it wasn't like we just decided that this is going to incorporate. Like I feel like there is sort of an organic thing, which I mean can also lend some credence, I guess, to like to the skeptical side of like, well, see, like without even knowing organically, all these things have infiltrated. I guess the question for me, and I think it can apply more just like in general, like how Christians like engage with culture and live in a culture, is sort of like the idea that like does the fact that some of these traditions and stuff like sort of were inspired by or borrowed from like other pagan or secular settings, like does that make it wrong? Like does that make it therefore because a pagan culture or cult or whatever used to like use trees in one of their festivals, to use trees as a Christian is therefore inherently wrong? And I think I think that misunderstands, one, the Bible, but two, just I think the mindset of kind of like the early church. Like I feel like the way that this gets framed is like like the church was just sort of seduced, and we didn't realize we had these things come in. And like I think if you look at like the way that the church sort of approached culture, like the New Testament church, like they were very in some ways intentional about like they weren't all up in arms about baptizing cultural things and being like, I think I don't think it's a mistake that like we celebrate Christmas in December, because for, when some of that stuff sort of had, tied back to culture, like that was familiar to people. People celebrated sort of stuff in December. I think the church is like, oh, well, we have something more important to celebrate. So like, why don't we just do it then? Or, like, sort of like baptizing and like redeeming, transforming things from like pagan roots into like more, into like a Christian, which I mean, like you see that all the time. Like, like anyone that wears like a cross necklace, like, it's like a pagan instrument of execution. And yet for Christians, it's like, nah, like, but we've claimed that. And now it's just like, visual of victory. And, like, I feel like the church has done that all throughout its history of just like, because you can do the same with like Easter and other holidays. Like, it's just like, hey, like, this is sort of the way the culture celebrates things. And like, we have the truth. And like, so we can sort of claim these things as ours, like, rather than sort of it going the other way of like, they're influencing the church in some kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more of a conversation kind of between maybe culture and church and sort of how these two things work out over time. And so I think it is very much, the church can see things in culture and sort of draw those out, sort of redeem those in some way, make them sort of speak to the church and for what we stand for. And I think that can be a really beautiful thing. Like, obviously that has like limitations. Like, there's just like, you can only take that so far. And so like, there's certain things that you probably wouldn't be successful sort of, reimagining certain symbols or iconography. But I do think the church has been doing that for a long time. And I think like perhaps what something started as, like if no one is connected to the origins of something, I don't think that means that like we're now still celebrating whatever that thing is as it started. So like if the Christmas tree was like some pagan ritual, like I don't know that anyone today is still sort of like hearkening back to that, like whatever pagan ritual that was connected with. And like you said with the cross, like I don't think, people who wear crosses or, put them on their bumper or whatever, they're not like celebrating like torture, like that's not how they view the cross now, because it has sort of had that redeeming quality. And now in today's society, it represents, that freedom in Christ, that sacrifice that Christ made on our behalf, the payment of sin, like all of these sort of things, rather than, perhaps what it was originally set out to do.
I think even you can see that with like a lot of like the hymns and stuff, Christian hymns, like a lot of those are borrowing like folk tunes, like they're borrowing melodies and like stuff from songs that like weren't written to honor Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's like the sense like we're redeeming culture, and like we're taking things that aren't connected to Jesus, and like we're shifting the meaning of it, like kind of transforming, which I think is like the heart of, like that's what Christianity is all about, of like transforming something that's sinful and bad into something that is sort of honoring to God. Kind of the verse that came to mind for me, 1 Corinthians 7:8. Just the verse about like the church wondering like about the meat sacrificed, like that should we eat meat if it was like originally used like sacrificed to like pagan idols, and like where Paul is like, well, like if you have a problem with it, then don't. Like if it's gonna be a hindrance, but like at the end of the day, like it's meat. Like yeah, it was used maybe originally for something else, but like right now we're eating it and we're fellowshipping, and it's actually like edifying to the body, and like let's focus on like what it is right now, and not just sort of worry that like the thing itself has somehow been very much defiled. And I feel like for Christmas you can see a lot of that, of just like what, like I think Christians should be way more concerned about like sort of the modern secular influences and commercialism and some of that kind of stuff about Christmas, and like guarding against that, than at all worrying about like what some pagans were doing 3,000 years ago with a tree or a wreath or something. So I think, hey, however you choose to celebrate, but I think just sort of make sure that like how you're celebrating today is honoring to Jesus, like regardless of sort of where some of the traditions came from. Speaking of things that are done to hopefully honor Jesus, kind of another thing I thought we would we would touch on, because it's another thing that sort of makes the rounds at this time of year, for good and also maybe not for good, and at least for viral. And that is Christmas pageants, the good and the bad. So that's like
The good, the bad, and the spectacular.
and the spectacular camel, centric. So these things can get wild. But I do think like many people grow up. I mean, depending on maybe your church size and stuff, but like one of the traditions we have at Christmas is sort of these like nativity plays, these pageants. Like, like we just had ours. We went 2 days ago to see our church put on like their annual, big Christmas play. And I mean, like, there's a spectrum for this. There's very much the like, a bunch of crying kids in like towels as shepherds, and very homegrown. And then you can get like, like. You have people riding in on real camels and like lights and like people ascending from the ceiling and you can get some of these churches can get pretty crazy with this. I mean, I think because of the extreme crazy one, like the over the top spectacles, like those are the ones that tend to sort of dominate the conversation. Yeah, because those can very much go viral, and that has already been the case this year. You can find a lot of videos and stuff like on TikTok and. Like people outside the church or just dissatisfied within the church, like calling, to tax the church, like saying, no, clearly the church is not using all this money for,
for benevolence.
Yeah. Like, if they can afford to, import some camels,
rent a camel,
then they should afford to pay taxes. But I thought we could just get into that a little bit of like things, because I feel like obviously like the specifics of just sort of the Christmas one, but I feel like even beyond that of just like sort of the role of these sort of performances, like, because I feel like at its heart is this sort of the question of like, how do we like, as the church be in this culture, like during these cultural moments and stuff. And like what is the most like effective or like, biblical or God honoring ways that we can kind of conduct ourselves and like present ourselves to, the culture around us. And is that a very high spectacle Christmas program, or is it not? Or is it somewhere kind of in the middle? But what are some of your initial thoughts just on these performances?
I think the fact that that I think everyone would say like, maybe like camels, like live camels in your performance is going too far. The fact that like I think most people can point to some instance of like, this is a church that maybe has gone, it's over the top, it's maybe too much, indicates, I think that we are okay with a certain amount of spectacle and that there is sort of an upper bounds of how far you can go with something like a Christmas play. And I think most people would say that like Christmas pageants are good, and I think it's also kind of going back to our previous conversation on traditions. Like that is one of those things. It's like, I'm sure there are many churches who wouldn't dream of not putting on a Christmas play. Like some, obviously not every church does that, but like of the ones that do, I feel like it would be met with a lot of resistance if they were 1 year to say, you know what, we're just not going to do our annual Christmas play. Like I think there would be, riots and like people would be very upset about that. But I think everyone recognizes that somewhere, is going too far. Where that is I think kind of the crux of the question.
Yeah, because I feel like if we can, if we can recognize that like, there's a line that is crossed, then like it's more just a question of like where that line is. Like obviously, like because like how do you navigate that then? Like if it's like, if you recognize that you can definitely have too much of it, then like I feel like churches should evaluate like, so like, are we doing too much? Like how do we like it's clearly not all just anything goes, because we know that you can get carried away and it reflects poorly. And I do think that there's and I'll be honest, like I struggle somewhat with this. Like I have to guard my heart, and I feel like in many ways I'm like a self contradiction with my views on some of these things. But because I feel like it is easy to be very cynical about these.
Yeah,
sort of because like churches spend a lot of money. I mean, again, the churches that do put on these relatively high quality like performance, like those kind of churches, like they do spend a lot of money on this, like
Yeah.
time and resources, and like, a lot of their emphasis at Christmas and stuff like is centered on sort of these performances. Right, this is the big thing we do at Christmas time,
Mm-hmm.
and like there is a part that you can definitely approach with a cynical mindset of like is that really the best use of our resources? Like,
Right.
Like if we're thinking how can we sort of make the biggest impact in our community at Christmas? Like, you have a big performance with camels, or just a lot of lights and a lot of money, and bringing in artists and stuff, or do we like pay the Christmas bills and buy kids toys and like do things like give outside of the church, and obviously like that's not necessarily like mutually excuse. You can do
Right.
both
Right.
of those things, but there is a sense of just sort of like, is this really like, are we giving sort of the community the gift that they want, or is it really more about us? And
Is it the gift that the church wants to give,
Yeah.
or is it the gift that the community is willing to receive? And I think that is. I mean, how you maybe frame the purpose of your Christmas pageant, I think probably tells a lot of where your heart is, what the church is thinking when it is putting on some of these things. And then also I just think it can be I think it can be tricky because Christmas pageants are kind of by nature just sort of a retelling of a church story, of a story that's very near and dear to church members' hearts. And so, is that the best vehicle? Like if the idea is that it's really an evangelical sort of like, or evangelistic type of outreach, is that really the case when, it's very much a sort of a churchy language? It's all kind of doing a lot of things that are traditions within the church. I think you can kind of get some conflicting feelings about these things, and it's tough to know, because you could draw that line kind of anywhere.
Yeah, 'cause that is the sort of the because you can play that game with anything. Like you could say, hey, instead of all this money in a Christmas pageant, like why don't we go, pay the Christmas bill? Like, would more, instead of spectacle and trying to convince people of the gospel of spectacle, like perhaps they'd be more convinced by just like practical acts of love in their own setting. Like,
Yeah.
But like you can also, why don't we meet in a tent and sell our building and like pay off the debts? Like.
Yeah.
Or why, instead of having coffee available in the, foyer, like, why don't we just use that money on coffee beans and like, send it to needy kids? Like, you can do that with a lot of things.
Right. Right.
That like at some point you can't really get into, like, or what, do we need all the fancy lights and we can worship? Like, you can get carried away with some of that.
Yeah.
To where I feel like even the more cynical of like Christmas performances, like those types of people probably aren't consistent in a lot of ways. This is
Sure.
It's like the church shouldn't do this, but I still kind of like this thing over here we do, and I think that's worth the the money. But I think why this question, why I find it interesting is this like kind of the role of like sort of the arts or performances and like just spectacle to like is that really as effective as we think it is, and like or like to justify as much.
Yeah.
Because like, I'll be honest, like for me, like the perfect Christmas performance is like a reflection of the church body. Like I know, like, and I'm not saying my opinion's like the only opinion that can be had, but like I'm not as big of a fan of like bringing in a lot of other people from the outside of the church and like really focusing on like, just providing like, we're just trying to provide a big spectacle Christmas, big, like you would find out there, don't go to the Nutcracker, come see our church perform. Like, I feel like the more powerful, which I know like, we're both huge, like Christmas Eve candlelight service. Like, to me, that's the most powerful service of the year.
Yeah.
Because it's usually sort of like the, like, I mean, like other people outside the church sometimes comes to those too, but it's sort of like simple. This is who we are. This is what we believe. And like we're singing. And I feel like there's more like attractive power in that than just sort of putting on a bunch of spectacle and some of that. The other side though is like, I do think like as someone that's very much like an advocate for the arts and stuff and the church, like I do think Christmas performances and stuff can be like the church should be kind of marshaling its artists and using them.
Yeah.
And like these sort of performances tend to give those opportunities to people that don't often get them throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like the maybe the idea of drawing that line to be like, not hiring outside performers to like glitz up your production. I think in some ways that could be a very sensible approach to it. And again, like we're not like this isn't a problem I think that will be solved like in this segment of our podcast. But I think it is worth thinking about, because it's like, yeah, I think it goes back to like, so what is it you're trying to achieve with a Christmas pageant? Like, and I think perhaps that is slightly different depending on the church that's doing it. And so I think based on that, maybe then you can start to look back and say, okay, is this, are we doing too much by like bringing in outside performers to like make this feel more professional and more polished, or to just to incorporate a certain element that we wouldn't have otherwise, or do we need to actually look at our members and say, okay, so based on who our members are, what kind of performance does this need to be? Like, what kind of pageant does this need to be based on the sort of talent that we have internally? And again, what is it you're trying to achieve with?
Yeah, and I feel like the movie that just came out last month was just too early for a Christmas movie, but now it's okay to. I think it's still in theaters.
Now you can recommend it.
The best Christmas pageant ever by director Dallas Jenkins of The Chosen fame. I feel like, a really good movie. I mean, the whole movie is about this conversation of like, it's about a church. If you haven't seen the movie or read the original book, like it's about like a church that is not even like a big church, but like they put on this performance, and it's sort of what they're known for, and it's all about this, the highest quality and like the way they always do it, and then a bunch of like outside kids from the church sort of like hijack the performance and volunteer, and they're about like just rowdy kids, and the whole thing is like, can we still salvage this, and everyone's coming, and like, can we still salvage it without sort of the perfect performance, and like, and they don't know like the best way to react or say things, and like the whole like, the takeaway from the movie is like it becomes the best Christmas pageant ever because there's like an authenticity that sort of cuts through some of the spectacle and the familiar stuff, and it's like, there's sort of like a beauty and just sort of a bit more like, hey, it's not quite as polished, but it's clearly like this is sort of who this community is and these people, and like a more honest reaction. Like I just feel like Christians can like, I'm all for the arts and performances and doing that. Like I just think we can put too much of our faith in like spectacle and thinking like, well, like, if we can tell them the gospel story, but like if they see it lived out with some camels on stage, like, or just very elaborate lights and things, like, then it's really gonna sink in, like that sort of the extra spectacle that we don't have throughout the rest of the year, like that's what convinces people, as opposed to like maybe just sort of that honest, like from the heart, sort of raw, this is who we are, we're just sharing our, like maybe that's actually at a deeper level more compelling to people than because like there's a lot of spectacle out there. Like I feel like if the church can't compete, like like we can't go toe to toe with like the world for that kind of stuff, like just providing like even the best like church performances and stuff. Like there's still other options out there that are like people are used to spectacle, but like what we can provide is like the more like honest spiritual. So I don't know, like I every year I kind of go back and forth. I always enjoy our church's performance and just other these types of things. There is a part of me that just wonders, like, at least recognizes like there is a danger in a line, and like whether we cross it every year or not is a different discussion, but like just like at least be aware, like what are we trying to accomplish, and like is the focus more on like us and how we look in presenting this, or are we really like using our resources wisely at Christmas time to like bless and give a gift to people in the community. But another thing that blesses us every Christmas is Christmas movies. So this is the last thing that we can touch on, and that is like, because Christmas movies are the best. Like are you like you're a big Christmas movie guy?
We have our favorites.
What are your like? Do you have like the same ones you watch every year, or is it?
We mix it up sometimes, but one that always gets watched every year is White Christmas. with Bing Crosby,
I've
and
never seen.
and the, oh, well, we need to maybe stop the podcast and we'll pick this up after you've been baptized. I think it's up there with probably one of the best Christmas movies ever made. It's a classic. But yeah, that would definitely be like top of the list. We do try and work in Muppet Christmas Carol.
Ooh, try and work in.
Yeah.
That seems non-committal. Or
It
the
is. I mean,
greatest-
some years we do, some years we don't. But yeah, it's, like those are sort of we watched The Bishop's Wife this year, which is another, like, I think that's what's his name? Cary Grant, I think. So it was like back in the 50s. So, it's sort of that
So you're
classic.
dipping your toes in like the more classics.
Oh yeah. Like we go way back typically.
Because we have a bunch, like we sort of work through, starting in like so far this year, we watched the cartoon Grinch last night. Great. Don't get me started about the newer Grinch stuff. The original is the
You're not the Jim Carrey live action
no,
Grinch.
that, and then they made another animated one that is just not good. Like,
Yeah.
stick with the classics. Like, obviously, we always watch Winnie the Pooh, like their Christmas special.
Okay.
You just can't go wrong with Winnie the Pooh.
We watched Peanuts the other night.
Oh, yeah, like
Snoopy's.
like the Charlie Brown.
Yeah, Charlie
Christmas,
Brown.
like,
Yeah.
there's just a lot. Again, it's probably the only real like holiday that has its like entertainment subculture. Like there's
Yeah.
like that I can think of at least. Like there's Christmas movies, there's Christmas songs. Like like there's a whole thing that we only sort of watch and listen to. You don't just like pop in the Grinch in like September or like
Unless
July or
unless
something.
you're a
like,
monster.
unless you're a big weirdo. So we can talk about this for a second. Like I think there is like there's value in that. Like I feel like there's and I think there's power in some of these sort of traditional like movies and like because in many ways like these Christmas tradition. We always watch. Usually Muppet Christmas Carol is the last one we watch because it's the best. So like,
Yeah.
a couple of days before Christmas, like we make sure we get that in, and like, we've been doing that for years. Like it almost becomes like a sort of part of our like not like a ritual in like a witchcraft satanic sense or like or,
Well, that's good.
but like they become sort of these rituals. Like
Yeah.
like hey we watch Charlie Brown Christmas. We've been doing that for 50 years or however long it's been out. Like,
Yeah.
or the Rudolph, from like the 62 or whenever that was, like the animated special or
Yeah.
Frosty or some of those things. Like sort of these stories that I kind of captured the spirit of Christmas. Like, I don't know. I think there's something interesting about the fact that we kind of return again and again to these stories and like they become just sort of part of our routines. And like, we sort of like bask in them once a year. Like,
Yeah.
and I think just in general, Christmas is very much like a season of tradition,
Yeah.
a season of like nostalgia, and like I don't know. I think I've seen people frame that in like a negative sense of like this is all sentimental and it's all nostalgia, and we got to live in the present, and you're so tied to your past, your childhood
Yeah.
or whatever. Like I don't know. I feel like the church in many ways, like the faith, should be a faith. Like not that we don't look forward, but like of nostalgia, of like looking back to like what Jesus did or Christmas and like some of these stories. Like I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing.
No, and I think our faith is one that, like, yes, we look forward, but it's very much based on like things that have happened in the past. And so I think it's very natural for us as Christians to look back, to remember. I think it's a very integral part of our faith. And I think having like a season of the year, it's a month, give or take, that you are a little more nostalgic, you're a little more reflective, you do things more out of tradition. I think that's perfectly acceptable. I don't think it's something that it's like we need to like, do this year round. And I think, like if you only ever like are trying to just capture nostalgia with every movie you watch and every song you listen to, like, you don't want to live there, throughout the year. But I think it can be very powerful, like when it's like, okay, well, this is a season where we are doing a lot of looking back, we are playing to the nostalgia, like, and I think it's okay to have like a season of the year where like, okay, that's an acceptable time to do some of these things that are very sentimental, that are very nostalgic. And I think that can be really good.
Yeah, and I think you can see sort of the power of some of that in sort of like by looking at the absence of it, like just with like secular, because there is sort of that question of like other than set aside Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You," like it's hard to think of another like Christmas song that has become like incorporated into the traditional canon, like
Yeah.
within the last couple of decades. Like I know there's lots of Christmas songs out there, and like different like renditions of songs maybe become more familiar on the radio at various times. But like we're still singing a lot of the songs that have been sung for like a very long time. I think even like Christmas movies too. Like you see, there's an article we'll link it below, written by Joseph Holmes, who is someone I want to get on the channel next year. I've been on his podcast. He does a lot of kind of culture writing at the website Religion Unplugged, and he had an article recently just about Christmas and like kind of looking at like the Christmas movie genre, and kind of in relation to like the faith-based genre, but it essentially makes the case that like in the last 2 decades, like Christmas movie, like that whole industry has sort of like tanked. Like like he sort of draws the line like Elf. I forget what year, about 2 decades ago. Like Elf. There are a couple like the last like, kind of classic modern Christmas movies were all in theaters around the same time, and really like since then, there's been Christmas movies and things, and but like nothing really that is stuck in the sense that like this year we had like Red One, like the Dwayne the Rock John, like no one's gonna be watching that movie. I mean, I don't know many people that watched it this year, but like in a couple of years, like that's not gonna be stuck.
Yeah.
Like there is sort of the sense that like we just haven't been able to tap into that same like power in recent years. Like, and obviously some of that's just nostalgic. You tend to like whatever you experienced as a kid,
Right.
and like that becomes what Christmas is. Like, so you're skeptical of newer stuff, but I do think there is something to be said about like, and he does that in the article of, so as sort of culture and like kind of the holiday became a bit more like secular, like accessible to secular audiences, and Hollywood sort of started directing its its emphasis towards sort of it still had Santa and some of that kind of stuff, but like leaving some of sort of the nostalgic, like the family roots or like the religious roots that like a Christmas sort of story without sort of the nostalgia, without pointing back to something important in the past, like, religious, either like explicitly or sort of like secondhand through like Santa and sort of what that represents. Like it just doesn't have the same power. Like I think even it's interesting. There's like Christmas songs. Like Richard Dawkins is famous. Like he's very militant atheist in so many ways, but he's famous. Like he a couple of years ago he had an article where he essentially just like said like, hey, secular modern Christmas songs are terrible. Like we don't need to be singing these. Like he's like, if I'm gonna sing a song, like, it's gonna be the old Christmas classics. And like he doesn't believe a word of those songs. Like there's just something about like sort of what those songs represent, like the sort of power in those songs that just hasn't been captured by these like modern equivalents. Like I don't know, I feel like Christmas is one of the sort of the times of the year that's just like it's the most natural for stories and stuff to like kind of overlap with the gospel, and like even people that aren't necessarily like open to like the truth of all that or religion, like I feel like still have a tolerance for like having some gospel, having some religion at Christmas time, because that's just so, even though we've become more secular, like it's just so ingrained into
I think that is something that's really baked into our society, like especially Christmas carols. Whether or not you agree with the message of Christmas carols, I think like carols are sort of the musical representation of Christmas, I think, kind of across the board, regardless of your how you feel about Christianity and God. Because I think it is you could trace that back to like Victorian England and like sort of how a lot of that, I think a lot of our probably nostalgia and Christmas carols and all those kind of things sort of got locked in probably around the Victorian time. And so I think a lot of our traditions today, around Christmas have probably were sort of cemented back then and have kind of carried over. And so I think it is a time to lean into the true message of Christmas, because I think there is like the most openness about that around this time of year. And I think it's hard for people to sort of, I think people outside the church to kind of deny the power of Christianity around this time of year. And so I think in some ways we have, I think we have a window of receptivity, maybe. Not that you just go like bulldozing through your conversations with people, but I think people are, it's a time of reflection, and I think that leads to maybe people are a little more searching this time of year, and I think that can be very beneficial for things like carols and Christmas movies to sort of insert the gospel in conversations and sort of the broader conversation, within culture.
Yeah, because I feel like you hear sort of like in the negative of like, all the people that only show up to church on Christmas, and it's like,
so yeah, but they're showing up to church.
But it's like, yeah, I feel like, well, like it makes sense that they would, because I feel like, this time of year like just primes people, like they get a taste of it, like even if it's not, like a Christmas Carol. I mean, the book's a bit more explicit with religion, maybe, but like a lot of the plays, you don't necessarily get Scrooge, giving the gospel presentation at the end, but you get sort of an echo of like that transformation, and like so, he essentially becomes, like he lives out sort of Christian virtue, and all those lessons, and all these, in the songs that we hear on the radio, like people are just more immersed in it, and like they're okay with being immersed in it. That I feel like as a church we should be like, that should be an opportunity for us, not just like well, if you really cared about it, then you'd be here in July too. Like,
how come we didn't see you in September?
It's like, well, like people should be more open to it because it is still such an ingrained, even as we become way more secular in many ways.
Yeah,
like Christmas just can't get away from sort of that like religious roots. So however you celebrate, whether you sing, listen to a bunch of terrible modern Christmas songs, or you listen to the good stuff, the classics,
the unadulterated classics that have not been
without
tainted with any modern choruses.
I had to restrain myself from going on my soapbox about adding modern choruses.
I'm proud of you, Daniel.
Perfect Christmas song.
Sorry, I brought it up.
I know. I think I've done that every Christmas we've done episodes. So I'll bottle that up until
we'll have to start a things we hate you should hate too.
Yeah, we'll
segment.
change the segment for just one episode. But yeah, this is the most wonderful time of year. So we do hope that you guys enjoy the different traditions, and just be sensitive to the fact that like this is sort of one of the best opportunities for the church to like, people are thinking about religion. They're saying religious, baby Jesus is all over the place. Like, look to see where God kind of is at work in this. But speaking of other things you can look to for, not spiritual reasons, but for just some entertainment, that is the movie theaters and things coming out, which leads us to the next segment of this podcast. We have Out Now and Coming Soon. So Out Now, kind of the big one that came out last week, two things. One, Kraven the Hunter, which I did not see. And
I know you hate that.
I know. I really felt some deep guilt about that. But apparently not a whole lot of people saw it.
Oh, and, well, that worked out.
The reviews were...
lucky you.
The reviews were not glowing. I think...
That's too bad. I was hoping you were going to get to see that one.
I know. Probably the most enjoyment I got was just reading some of like the review, like taglines. It's like people were pretty rough for this, and I'm burnt out from these kind of movies. And from the reception of this one, seems like a lot of people are burnt out. But so sorry, wasn't able to get a review for that one. I did have a review for Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim, an anime, reimagining of Lord of the Rings, and I actually enjoyed the movie quite a bit. I don't know if that's just because I got the
giant
big
hammer.
collectible hammer popcorn bucket, and that colored my
that probably helped.
Experience. But the movie did not do well.
Oh, really?
This didn't make a lot of money. Didn't really garner a lot of excitement. Which I don't know. It's too bad. I think it maybe. Yeah. I think
I'm kind of surprised by that.
I know the anime genre has exploded in recent years, but I still think that's just a barrier for a lot of people.
It is. I'm guessing anime is still fairly niche.
It's more.
I mean, I know it's
more mainstream than it was
10 years ago.
But I still think even if this was an animated, sort of more American animated, I feel like maybe people would be more, at least in America, more receptive. Okay, we can go see it. But I just think anime. I think because I've seen even other Lord of the Rings people be I haven't really heard much. It's you love Lord of the Rings, but it just seems like that. Well, this isn't really for me. And it was, which is not a good sign. The studio sort of made a statement after that, which I knew, but they didn't quite give it the attention it needed because they had their rights deadline. Like they had to put something in theater to maintain the rights for Lord of the Rings by a certain time, and this was how they did that to keep the rights renewed.
I see.
So it is sort of rushed and stuff, but I enjoyed it. I think if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, and like you're open to a different style,
I feel like it's an interesting crossover. Like I haven't seen it, but to me that like maybe on paper doesn't make sense, but I think seeing some of the trailers, like I can get behind that. Like I feel like it's kind of cool. Like it's kind of it's sort of the the sort of the team up that no one knew we needed. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, which has been a thing because I think the same director did some like anime Star Wars stuff.
Oh, I think I saw like one of those episodes, which to me Star Wars, it's very much more in that vein of anime, just because so much of the inspiration was from sort of the samurai culture, sort of originally to Star Wars. Anyways, that's sort of maybe something for another day.
Yeah, and like I'm not at all an anime guy.
Yeah,
but there's also something to be said about sort of hand drawn visuals and stuff that I feel like every time I see a movie that does that, it's like, oh, I miss that.
Yeah,
you can't recreate that with the 3D animation. For coming out this week, kind of the last, well, not quite the last, but the last kind of big family things for this year. Several movies. One, Homestead, which was Angel Studios movie, which I had the review out. I was mixed on this. I think I mentioned that last week. It's
yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious to see how this gets received. It's essentially a pilot for a TV show, but it's in theaters, and I feel like I would feel different had I just seen it in like streaming.
Yeah,
as part of the show.
Feels like a pilot to a TV show.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if people maybe will feel like they paid too much in the theater to see a pilot of a TV show that they don't know yet. But other things that you can pay for in the theater, full price. Two, kind of surprising going head to head. Like I feel like we have like weeks of no kids movie, or months of no kid movies, and we get like two of them in the same day. Obviously, it's Christmas and kids are out of school, but we have Sonic #3, and we have the Lion King, the Mufasa origin story, which I keep wanting to call live action,
but
even though it's not. Like it's all animated, but it looks like real animals. Like so, I don't know what the official
what
genre? Animated, but I guess.
Realistic animation,
but yeah, they look more realistic than like Sonic does. Like it's
yeah.
I don't know, like what do you call
it? It's not a cartoon.
No, but it
is
all made in a computer, so it's not live action. But I will keep doing that. But
it feels live action.
But so I'll be checking out reviews for both of these, trying to get the review out, by Friday, Saturday. Obviously, it gets hard around Christmas time. I don't know. I think.
Well, you just need to like focus on.
Yeah, just ignore my family.
Yeah, ignore your family and Christmas time. Get these reviews out, Daniel.
The first not live action, kind of live action Lion King was actually the first review we ever did here at the Collision. So this is like coming full. This circle of life has come around. So I'm more excited for that one. Sonic 3. My kids like it. I wasn't a big Sega guy. My problem with the Sonic movies is that there are humans in it. Like if you just gave me like the Sonic character, like the hedgehogs. Like that stuff is awesome, but then like most of the movies are just humans. Like I don't care about these humans. Like give us more Sonic. So hopefully, I think the first one had like way too much humans. Second one had too much, but there's more the animated characters.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping they continue that movement towards like less humans, more hedgehogs. But speaking of something that I want more of, this is the Christmas gift that I will cherish the most this holiday season. The final segment of this podcast, we have things we like that you should like too.
So this is my week for the things we like that you should like too, and I thought I would share actually a Christmas tradition that we started a few years ago in our household. And so it's not necessarily like a thing per se, but it is. I think it's something that everyone should adopt as a Christmas tradition, and that is the Christmas Eve book exchange. So this is something that we actually appropriated from the country of Iceland. I think this is sort of where they do a Christmas Eve book exchange, and we heard about that and we thought, we like books, we like exchanging gifts, and that's kind of a cool thing. And I think the thing that's cool about it is like I buy a book for my wife and she buys a book for me, and like when our kids are like, we get books for our kids to open on Christmas Eve. And I think the cool thing about it is like getting a book for someone else. And I think that can lead to some really interesting conversations because it's kind of okay, I think this is a book that you would enjoy. And I don't know, I think it's just kind of it's a fun gift. It's not like, it doesn't have to be overpriced. Like you can, we've done used books before, but it's just kind of a fun sort of pre-Christmas gift exchange that we've done. And we've done for a number of years now. And it's one of our favorite traditions, I think, now in our Christmas season.
See, I need to appropriate that from you because I feel like any tradition that ends with
and you
me having a new book seems to be, need to make sure that book exchanges don't have pagan origins.
Yeah, well, it came from Iceland, which there are lots of pagan origins over there, the Vikings, and so who knows? It could be, those literate Vikings and their reading and writing.
But I do think, like you said, there is thing I think. Maybe beautiful is too sentimental of a word, but about giving other people books, because I feel like it does. I mean, it reveals a lot, and how they think. I know, maybe even last year, like my older brother for Christmas, he gave me some other stuff too, but I just looked through his bookshelf and found books that he either bought, not read, or read.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I just I know you're into this sort of weird stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like. That's cool.
Yeah. One of my favorite books that I got recently, in the last few years, but was from your brother about a guy who was teaching English in Japan, and so I sort of mixed, just sort of some of the Japanese culture, but also learning, this American guy in Japan. That was a really good book. So yeah, he's got it figured out.
So I think we should normalize giving people books and make that a thing.
And I just think I do. I think it is cool that what it says about what you think about another person and sort of okay, I think this book would resonate with you, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I think that's kind of the fun of it.
I should tell my wife that I've actually been doing this tradition for years, just with myself.
Yeah,
I exchange books, books that I think I would really resonate with.
Yeah,
so I go ahead and add that to my shopping cart on Amazon. So it's all for the reason for the season. But hey, we're excited that you guys have joined us once again. Again, this, like we said, this is our last week of the podcast for the year. We'll be back in at some point in January when we feel like working off the Christmas coma. We'll
Stay tuned.
So we hope you guys will join us again. Again, we're excited for, I think we'll have some new stuff on the podcast and stuff here at the Collision, kind of geared up for the new year. So we hope you will join us again for another year of cultural conversations. So until then, have a great Christmas, and we'll see you then.